I wouldn't necessarily say that INFJs are thinking all the time. I wouldn't necessarily say that the INFJ is the type that is, of all the different types, that is the one that is thinking the most, that is mostly, most of the time in a state of thought, of thinking, right? Now, some people might think that the reason why I'm saying this is because there's no real way that we can tell apart the time spent thinking between, say, an INFJ and an INTJ, or an INFJ and an INFP, or an INFJ and an INTP, and what have you, maybe even an INFJ and an ENFP. Okay, like it's not necessarily that easy to just say yes. I have evidence that the type that is the most oriented to, or rather the more likely to spend all their time or almost all their time thinking, even more than all of the types, is INFJ. I don't think that we have any way to know that, because we have no way of knowing this, because we can't do anything else in this regard than just rely on the self-reports of other people, of our type or of other types. We're not inside other people's heads. So there's no way of saying, I'm thinking, right, I'm more often and for longer periods of time in a state of thinking than ENFPs are. How do you know? You're not in their heads. Okay, so this entirely depends on subjective self-reports. We better keep this in mind. Now, of course, what we can look at, what we can have more evidence of, and here I think that we can make a strong case that the INFJ is probably like in the top 3, right? In terms of the type that spends the most time, not in a state of thinking, because we can't really know that, but in a state of being lost in thought. Okay. So you see, this might seem like it's a bit of a nitpicky distinction. Why am I trying to draw a distinction between thinking and being lost in thought? Okay. Well, actually, there's an important difference, and that's why I want to draw your attention to that. When you're thinking, you are actually trying to figure things out in your head rationally. That's the activity of thought. In this sense, thinking is not quite like musing. It's even less like daydreaming. It's not like fantasizing, being lost in creative fantasy. And it's even less like being lost in thought. Someone who is like lost in their minds, in the clouds, in their heads, is not necessarily someone who's thinking. They're someone who are letting their imagination loose. Or there's someone who are just like in their minds, just living inside it somehow, not being particularly connected to the matters and the daily grind of external reality, the social world, the things that are happening right here and right now. We don't have a super developed awareness of what's going on around you in a very, in a very proactive sense. So, from the moment that you say this, we've talked about being lost in thought. INFJs are certainly among the types, really I think in the top 3, most likely to be lost in thought. Like on a regular basis, for long periods of time, and in such a way that it's comfortable to them. It's much more their comfort zone. Because what is being lost in thought? Well, what being lost in thought is essentially living in the NI world. If we've established that NI is really usefully conceptualized as a world, then when you're lost in thought, you're lost to the external world because you're in the NI world. And you're very comfortable there, of course. That's the world of NI. It's the world of, the default word in a sense for you, for your ego, if you're an INFJ. If you're an INTJ too, but again, the INTJ is a bit different because the INTJ has an access to the world through extroverted judgments, which is more direct than extroverted feeling. Extroverted thinking, for INTJs, extrovert feeling for INFJs depends on the acknowledgement of other subjectivities, and it's easier to either not be around other subjectivities or just switch off from the interaction with other subjects, other people, taken as subjectivities. When you're dealing with just the mechanics of the external world as such, like in extroverted thinking, it's a little bit harder to switch off and be lost in thought, which is why I think INFJs on average are much more likely to be lost in thought than INTJs. But INTJs will be more likely to be lost in thought, being NI dominant, being creatures of the NI world, than most other types. But INFJs are really, really near the top, or perhaps at the top, because, again, keep in mind that underlying all this that I'm talking about is an existential condition called alienation. When I talk about alienation, I'm not talking about a psychological pathology, because alienation is often described as one of the symptoms of certain types of pathology, in certain types of neuroses, certainly in types that we would describe as borderline personality disorders, in psychosis. We talked about being disconnected, being alienated. I don't mean alienation in this sense. I mean the alienation at an existential level. INFJs, vast majority of them, quite aware there's an external world, and the external world is not like their internal worlds. They're able to tell what the difference is, and they're able to be in one or the other. They just have a big preference for their internal world, and they don't really know sometimes what to do, what the meaning is in the external world. So it's a crisis of meaning, and so at some level. And a lot of the strategies around trying to become spiritualized is to create that bridge of meaning from the NI world onto reality, and vice versa, back and forth. When you've really achieved spiritualization, you can travel from one to the other. But alienation is always there at some level, right? Alienation as an existential condition is, of course, very much connected to the quality of being lost in thought, because when you're lost in thought, you're essentially the closest to embracing alienation by taking the side of the NI world. And it's okay, because the NI world is a world where we replenish ourselves and our resources, our sense of subjectivity. What's important is to not always be lost in thought, to be able to engage external reality. And in fact, one of the traits of the spiritualized INFJ, because they're bridging the NI world and the external world, is that they will often come across like they're lost in thought even as they achieve things in the external world. Which is why Dale Cooper, the character of Twin Peaks, is such a great example of a spiritualized INFJ, you see. Because he always seems like he's kind of in his world, and yet he's doing things. It might not seem like it, but he's actually very clued into the external world, but while never losing sight of the NI world. So let me know if this video was useful, guys. If you enjoyed it, please, for referencing purposes, a like is always appreciated. Of course, subscription to my channel if you're interested. Don't forget, I've written quite a few books, including 2 on the INFJ itself, the type. So if you want to know more, my latest one is called The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World, how to lead an authentic Dale Cooper style INFJ existence in this world we often consider hostile. True, in this time and place nowadays in the world today. This is the book to get if you want to know more about this. Check the link below, and this prequel goes very well together. By the way, the 2 books is The Ecstatic Soul, the deepest look at the INFJ mind, INFJ consciousness, what it's like to be an INFJ. That's where I first developed the concepts of alienation and other things. A new look at the INFJ personality, a link is below. And as usual, guys, the main lifeblood, the lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. I really rely on your donations. I could not do it without you. I keep going thanks to your generous support, so please consider joining my Patreon, the link below. There's also a one-off PayPal donation you can make. You can access bonus content, in-depth discussion, videos as well, bonus videos, and interact with the community, including myself. Consider it. I'll talk to you next time, guys. Bye-bye.